Excellent. So, Noah Waisberg, welcome to the next episode of the Legal Dispatch. Great to have you here. This is always my favorite part of the week to kind of meet really interesting founders such as yourself. Just before we kick in, I will give you a plug for those out there that want to follow you on Twitter. It's at NWaisB, but it's spelled at Waisb for those on Twitter. And for LinkedIn, I think you can just search on your name, right? So Noah Waisberg. So welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
So maybe just like, in the very beginning, it'd be great just to get an introduction, tell us what you do, who you work for, and maybe just a little bit about your history. And we'll dive into that a little bit as well in the podcast. But yeah, let's just set some foundations if we could.
Sure. So I'm Noah Waisberg, and I'm a co-founder and the CEO of Zuva. Zuva is an AI company that helps people pull data out of contracts easier than they could otherwise in a very specific way. Our technology right now, our in-market product is an API that enables people who would like to get contract intelligence into their software to put in place ours, which comes with 1,200 fields straight out of the box and enables you to kind of install that functionality into another app, which we think is kind of cool and fairly different. Before that, I was the CEO and co-founder of Kira Systems, which grew to be probably the biggest contract analysis player focused on professional service firms, especially legal. We had 18 of the top 25 M&A firms in the world as our customers when we sold to Latera in September of 2021. We also had parts of all the big four and a whole lot of other alternative legal service providers that used Kira to review contracts faster, more accurately. So I did that from 2011 until 2021. And prior to that, I was a lawyer, corporate lawyer at Weil Gotshal in New York. And that was kind of my first full-time sort of real job post school.
Yeah, so I mean, like, fascinating story. It's like a fairy tale, isn't it? It's exactly 10-year kind of journey. Maybe it's not a fairy tale for you, but from the outside it is.
I
But
guess so. There's challenges along the way, instead of a free.
yeah, I mean, like, I kind of liken it's akin to kind of building a house, which I'm just finishing a house after 7 years, and I'm exhausted. Like, you must be an absolute glutton for punishment to go, come back and do it again.
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting. A couple of my sort of peers from Kira, like my co-founder and one of our sort of our earliest senior exec, both took time off afterwards.
Yeah,
And like the first part of Zuva was pretty intense. So we
yeah,
did the spin-off and we got to take 34 of the Kira employees, but that included like probably 28 or 29 of those were product people. And there was like my EA, and like an awesome IT guy, right?
yeah.
And that's it. And other than that, there were like no administrative people. And Kira people gave us some support, but like we were very lean administratively. And fortunately, we were able to hire up quickly and fill out a bunch of different roles. So it's gotten better. But for those first few months were pretty hard and pretty exhausting. And I was like, what am I doing at some points? But at other points, like overall, I was still really having fun, and it just like was a really good team and a really good problem, and I was just enjoying setting everything up again from scratch.
Yeah.
Really, I wouldn't have done it, but I just thought the opportunity was really a neat one. Like we had for so long thought that Kira obviously got pretty solid traction inside
Yeah.
the legal market, but we thought that there was such a big adjacent market with other people who need data out of contracts. And it was just such an amazing opportunity to be able to get, number one, kind of like a copy of our underlying contract finding technology from Kira, as well as like some different things that we've been working on there that we hadn't really brought to market. So to get that stuff and then 34 like really strong teammates was just kind of like an opportunity. Well, I guess including me, was an opportunity that just seemed like I should keep pushing through, even though I was tired. Uh,
Yeah. And I guess that must be a testament then to a really good relationship with the people that you sold to kind of have that trust and and I guess to allow, because typically with those sales, it's a very kind of tight binding non-compete. Like, I've had friends who have done that in other areas of businesses where they basically have had to go and hibernate for until this kind of non-compete comes off and before they can kind of enter into anywhere near the space that kind of that you have. So it must have been a good deal.
yeah, I think it was a good deal. I think I give them, like Latera and HG, who are kind of the private equity firm behind
Yeah,
them, a
yeah,
lot of creativity for just being willing to be creative around a deal. Like what happened, they kind of came to us, offered a price that was fair, but not one that we were inclined to take because we were kind of inclined to keep pushing the business.
yeah,
And so we initially kind of were going to go back and just say no. And then we reflected on it and we realized that they only needed part of our business, right? Like they were only really interested in part of our business and that we could sell them that part of our business and not the other part of the business. And we didn't think it would even hurt them based on what we knew about their mission, which was to
yeah,
kind of become like one vendor for law firms. And so as we kind of looked at their business, what we realized was we had these other parts of Zuva that really excited me and really excited my co-founder and really excited some of the people on our team within Kira
yeah,
that if I were Latera, I would have actually shut down, right? Like it would be inconsistent with their mission and they cost a lot of money and like
yeah, yeah,
and so what we were able to kind of offer them was an ability to get our business, but with a bunch of the sort of unnecessary costs that wouldn't have interested them stripped out immediately.
yeah,
And also to sort of make a pretty unique deal where it wouldn't go to like some kind of auction format and get price competitive. So it really enabled kind of Latera, I think, to get an asset they felt like at a price they were willing to pay, and us to kind of get a price that we were sort of happy with in the context of getting into this broader deal as well. So it was a really cool deal, and I give them a lot of credit for the creativity and kind of courage to go do something that a lot of other people might not have.
yeah. And congratulations to you. Like, like as a serial entrepreneur myself, like it's so hard to sell companies. I'm really always excited to start them and build them, but selling them is no easy feat. So congratulations.
Well,
Um,
story's not done yet.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we'll talk more about Zuva for sure. I mean, like, I'm really interested. You're Toronto based, and we chatted before about how you spent some time in New York, but right now you're in the beautiful bourgeois city of Paris.
Oui, c'est
But
ça.
tell me, like, what does the day in the life of Noah look like? What happens every I imagine it's very varied and different, but give us an example of of a day in the life.
So it's much less varied during the kind of COVID period because in pre-COVID times, I traveled a lot for work. Like one of
Yeah,
the things about running a company out of Canada is that nearly all your revenue, if it's a healthy company in legal tech, your revenue is nearly all from elsewhere, right? So I think about 95% of our revenue was non-Canadian, which meant that even though we had very nice penetration in Canada, like I think 5 of the seven Sisters firms were Kira customers, it still
yeah,
meant that like 95% of our revenue was coming from elsewhere. So that meant I was on a plane a lot. Um, but during COVID times, things are more regular. First thing to know about me is I am very much a night person, right? So my strange, as you mentioned, am working from Europe for a couple months, from Paris for a couple months right now as we speak, and just sort of taking advantage of lockdowns and office closures to work remotely. And what I found is it works amazingly well with my schedule because nothing, like right now we're speaking at 1 p.m. Paris time, and it's like one of the few times that I have a meeting before, say like 2 or 3 or even 4,
Yeah.
right? And as a night person, that works super well. I tried other things that I try to do. I've got 3 young kids, and I try to make sure I spend time with them when not traveling, which again, fairly easy these days.
Yeah.
Especially like pretty rare that I book anything during their kind of bedtime and dinner time.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the third thing, I try to mostly take my weekends off. That wasn't always the case. Earlier days of Kira, I grinded through them. But I found that I can work pretty intensely during the 5 days that I'm on. Um, and I still will generally put in maybe weekends off. I still might work a bunch on like a Sunday night or something like that. And if I have to, like I'll do otherwise, like during the deal or something like that, I certainly can. But I just try to get a break then. And number 4, I try to exercise a fair amount, like at least sort of 3 more intense exercise sessions a week if I can. So those are the kind of things about my day, but generally like more afternoony kind of stuff. Like not, alas, in the pre-kids days, I could maybe wake up pretty late. These days, it's a little bit harder to do that, but I
Yeah.
do tend to just be more productive late in the day. So it wouldn't be, I know some of my teammates have to get them used to the idea that like, just because you get a message from me at like, 1 or 2 a.m., like just don't stress it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so the nice thing about being here is I'm 6 hours ahead of time and it works out perfectly, right? Like you send a message at like 2 a.m. and it's like 8 p.m., like a kind of civilized hour.
Yeah, I must take a leaf out of your book because for the pretty much for the whole of the lockdown, we went the reverse way. So I went to the Caribbean and spent the lockdown in the Dominican. But that meant I had to wake up at 4 actually 3:30 every morning because that was when London was coming
Yeah,
on board. So
that
like,
would be, yeah.
yeah, it was tough. I mean, it was great because you had all the afternoons with the kids and the beach, and that was fantastic. But it is exhausting to get up at 3:30 for months on end.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
had like a week-long stretch where I was further west, so it's not kind of the same type of experience, and I found
yeah,
it was hard. It is nice to have that afternoon off, but
yeah,
it did not work perfectly for my schedule.
yeah. Now I understand you're a night owl, and like me too. But and I also understand kids have no mercy for the sleep-ins. Like I can sympathize with that for sure. But like, what are your morning habits? Like, do you meditate? Do you have a cup of tea? Do you get a croissant or a crepe in the
So
morning?
yeah, I have
What?
pretty much the same breakfast every single day. It is always like plain, generally lower fat yogurt with protein powder and some fruit. I switch up the fruit, but that's about
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Uh, Not a big sugar person, so generally an unflavored protein powder. I can come to me for unflavored organic protein powder recommendations, and I can hook you up.
yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
and anyways, just do that. Often, a few days, probably 3 days a week, go to my gym. From back home here, I've been varying up that a little bit.
Yeah,
And then otherwise, just sort of sit down and work for a while. I'll try to do some calls, depending on if I can, walking, right? Like switch some meetings from being like a video call to a walking call, especially like if they're internal. Like if it's someone who I haven't spoken to before, probably stay with video. But if it's someone who I know relatively well, might well do it as a walking call and try to encourage the other person to as well.
yeah,
Um, Generally, do the sort of family bedtime, and then pretty often in the evenings I'm back at work
yeah.
until, it wouldn't be that weird for me to work until like midnight or 1 or 2.
Yeah. Just on the walking one, like I mean, obviously as a CEO, and you've been one for quite a long time, and obviously very successful. I mean, you have to have that helicopter view, but then obviously still be tactical when you need to, but not too tactical, I think, as a CEO. But like you're talking about doing the calls when you walk. Do you think like you do a lot of good thinking when you're moving your body as opposed to And do you think I think that thinking part, do you do that collaboratively, or do you do that by yourself and then come with an ideas? Where is your best thinking happening?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. Actually, one of the things that I found with the walking calls is they're good for thinking, not as good for sorting through like structured agenda items, if that makes sense. Like if it's
Yeah.
something where you have like a hard set of agenda items, probably doing them not walking, like sitting down and maybe even with like an actual agenda and notes and stuff like that is a more effective way to do it. But if it is kind of thinking, I find a walk can be an effective way to do that. Sometimes talking to someone, sometimes not. Like I definitely have some teammates where my thinking has progressed a lot through sort of batting ideas off of them. So walking and talking to them can be pretty effective. Um, it's an overall thing. I think one of the quirks of being a startup founder is like, and like executive at a startup company is like, people assume maybe that like, all you're doing is innovating all the time, when in fact, like a lot of the power comes through not innovating, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just like picking a few things that you're going to do and then just trying to be pretty careful about figuring out what those few things you're going to do are, and then just doing those few things and not doing everything else, right? So like
Yeah.
not going off in lots of different directions and actually just staying focused, right? So
Yeah.
like in fact, I'm not going to say like creativity doesn't matter, because I think there are lots of times when you can think up more clever solutions to problems, but I don't know that you're necessarily trying to like spur creativity as much.
Yeah. I think we've
Like
all
it
got.
maybe comes more naturally, right? And it's like the, you
Yeah.
know, relentless, focused execution that is the harder and perhaps more important part for a lot of startup people.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, everyone has this romantic idea that every startup is just like Steve Jobs, right? Everyone's creating this Apple, which I imagine is also incredible hard work as well. But like that, that it is a very creative, kind of strategic, fun, innovative way to work. Mm.
Yeah, if you read about Jobs like towards, well, first of all, like reading about Jobs towards like the latter half of his career, first of all, I don't know that like it was a fun place to work, but I think it was a
Oh yeah,
place where people did the best work of their lives. So I think that is like a really positive thing. But I think if you read about Jobs through the years, like in fact, like he had creative moments, but I think a lot of his thing was just like a maniacal focus on the details, like on execution, right? Like it's not like we have to come up with a new product. It's like actually we need to do less products and we need to do them exceedingly well,
yeah. No,
right?
I
Where
agree.
I sit on an Apple computer looking at my iPhone, like,
Yeah, exactly. Yes, me too. But yeah, like I've just finished reading Bad Blood as well. I don't know if you've heard about
oh
that.
yeah, no, that's
Uh,
like, yeah, no,
which
I read
is
that
which is
very.
on the other scale, right? Which is everyone thought she was Steve Jobs. However, it was executing Smoke and Mirrors potentially.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that is a story that like I'm not gonna say makes you feel good, because I like obviously not good or anything like that, but like there's
Yeah,
times growing a startup's really hard, right? Like you can have like, we had periods where we went like our end of year numbers were like two people, three people, four people, like then it was like 8 people, 20 people, 30 people,
yeah,
and 18 months later it was like 100 people, like, and then it was, however many more. And that's like, it's really hard and stuff is breaking all the time during that period, right? Because even if you have it right at say a 30-person size, like you grow that by 50% and all of a sudden everything is broken. And it's not like you're growing it by 50%, you're actually like tripling it or something like that, right? So stuff's breaking all the time. And I remember I was in the midst of a period like that, which like in retrospect was actually a pretty good period. Like we were growing well. There was
yeah,
like some issues, and I remember reading Bad Blood and just being like, it could be a lot worse, right? Like at least we're not.
yeah.
Like, doing
Yeah,
this.
in Swedish they have the saying like "Elands problem," which is like first world problems. Like I think, yeah, it's a good problem to have, the growth one. I think
Yeah,
it for
I
us
think
in psych right now, it's the same. Like we're growing really quickly,
awesome.
and Alistair and Lewis are kind of the CEO CFO. They're I think they're experiencing exactly what you were just talking about. When you build for 50, and it's like holy crap, now we're on towards 80, and then we're at 160, like
Yeah,
etc. And it
totally.
grows.
It's just
Mm.
like it's really challenging and like stuff's breaking all the time and you just can't fix it right away and you just have to like choose things to fix first and
Yeah,
leave other things sucking for a while. And ideally you choose right, but you don't always get it right. Like,
yeah,
that people get really unhappy when you get it wrong.
yeah. Maybe changing it up a bit. Like when you think of the word successful, who's the first person that comes to your mind and why?
Well, probably we were just talking about Steve Jobs, so probably due to a recency effect, he's going to come to my head.
Yeah,
But I think it'd be pretty hard not to credit him. I think I probably would incline at this stage of my life towards thinking about lots of entrepreneurs who've been really successful. So Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or like Frank Slootman, like those guys really stand out to me as people who've been successful in different ways. But I think there's probably lots of more unsung ones that I might be able to come up with if I had a little bit more time. But just somehow I happened to, like we were just talking about Jobs. I'm just reading Slootman's book. Like,
yeah.
Musk, it's pretty hard to get away from these days.
Yeah.
So I think
And
that's
and speaking of books, obviously you're an author yourself.
ah,
Um,
yes.
and the AI for authors, which is a great book. Very, very kind of practical. Like, I mean, I'm really interested what obviously you went from this lawyer, right, to this AI entrepreneur. What was the internal conversation that you had with yourself in your mind, or maybe it's to your wife, I'm not sure, that said, you know what, I'm done with the law firm. I'm gonna make the leap. What was the moment that made that happen, and what was the conversation you had with yourself?
So I had been thinking about, like, as much as anything, I ended up in law as a bit of a default. I had been in a PhD program in political science prior to going to law school, and I realized it wasn't what I felt like doing for the rest of my life. And I'm a fairly practical person, I guess, and I realized that I was like exceedingly well qualified to go to a good law school and like questionably qualified to get anything else. And so I figured I would take the LSAT and see if I did okay, and then apply to a limited number of schools if I did okay. And I did that while still in my PhD program, on the thought that I could just finish my PhD and try to get something from there. Ended up in law school, but it was kind of like I think many people who go to law school, a bit of a default. Like for me, it was like a bit of a quirky default since a lot of my family members, like including my dad and like my grandfather and my aunt and stuff, had been lawyers and judges. So it was something I was like pretty familiar with. But it was something where even though I thought it was a good job and really interesting and noble, um, maybe because so many of those family members had done it, I kind of resisted it. But at a point, it seemed like the right thing to do. And so I went, did that, and ended up at a large law firm, Wolgachel, which I really liked. Great place. I still have like a ton of really close friends from there. I learned a ton doing it. But it wasn't what I felt like doing for the rest of my life. Like when I looked at the partners there, many of whom really impressed me, like were super smart. It didn't seem like the best way to sort of work. Like ultimately, I remember one of the partners I worked with, and like we had something come up on a deal, and she sort of canceled. Like she had rented, her 45th or 50th birthday or whatever was coming up, and she and her husband had rented like a private island, and like they were all excited about this trip, and like something came up on this deal that like in retrospect, was not like probably the biggest deal of her career, right? Like it was like an average run-of-the-mill deal. Like it was kind of important, but not like, a career-making deal by any means.
Yeah.
And she like canceled her trip, right? And I would just see that kind of thing over and over again. And it did not seem like like the partners did very well, but it did not seem like the best way to make money. Like even at the end of the road, like these people seemed like they were working exceedingly hard, super stressed. Like there just wasn't like it's not a great business, right? Like you're selling your hours and the hours of a limited set of associates who work for you, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so I thought it wasn't what I felt like doing for the rest of my life and that I should leave. And so then my question was, and I felt like doing something businessy. And my question was, should I start something myself or should I get a job in an existing company? Because I felt like I had a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And so I kind of spent like a year probably doing informational interviews, talking to people who'd left legal jobs mostly. And ended up, I had a talk with this one guy, Wes Voorhees, who kind of like inspired me that you weren't going to be able to, if you felt like leaving law, that you wouldn't be able to figure out what to do next in your sort of evenings and weekends, that it was a big enough task that you needed the mental freedom of quitting and just sitting and thinking. And so I did eventually. In fact, like it was more of a story to it than that, but I just quit and sat and thought. And when I quit, I had been thinking about doing one lawyer efficiency business and
Hmm.
started to kind of work through that after I quit and sort of traveled and rested for a bit. And then realized that that one wasn't going to be a big business. Started to think about another one that basically some people have built since. And I think has turned into like an okay business, but not a great business. But it didn't excite me that much. But then started thinking about contracts, and I realized that they could be a really nice business. Like when I'd quit, first of all, I didn't think it was what I felt like doing for the rest of my life. But secondly, just law seemed so inefficient. And that was both unfun as one of the junior people who had to do that inefficient work, but
Yeah.
also seemed very unsustainable. And so because it was unsustainable, I thought that kind of offered the opportunity for to sort of profit from the change. And so got going on contracts, which excited me and I thought fit the theory very well that I saw junior corporate lawyers spend huge amount of time reviewing contracts, that they made mistakes on this super important work, but that they tend to be looking for the same things over and over again. And so because of that, we thought there was an opportunity to build software to help people find that stuff and pull it out. And so it was kind of like a desire for change plus the right idea got me to start Kira. And with Zuva, it was again just seeing like an opportunity and an opportunity to work with a like to take an opportunity that I thought was really exciting and go at it with a really great group of people that seemed like worth taking again. So
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, we talked about you starting the new company and you've jumped straight back in again. No rest for the wicked. Um, and and you must have learned some gigantic lessons with Kira. So if you were to
yes,
just
that teaches you lessons. I did.
yeah, not to mention just being a father as well. But anyways, that's a different topic. But what would you say is your biggest your favorite failure that you have? What did you learn? And I guess maybe what are some of the things that you're bringing to Zuva that that you were kind of put to bed at Kira?
So one thing that I like to think, I can tell you about times when we made big mistakes with Kira, but one of the things that I always think about is there's a scene in Game of Thrones, and I don't know if you watched that show at all,
Oh
but
yeah, for sure.
yeah, so at the point in Game of Thrones when Theon, Greyjoy, and Bram Stark are talking, and Theon's like, "I've done all at the tree, right?" And it's
Yeah,
like getting close to the end, and Theon's like, "I've done all these terrible things. Like, I just feel so bad." And Bram is like, you are here because of all the things that you've done, right? So, and like that's who you are. And in fact, it's brought you to this point where you can do something really important. Um, and I think about a lot of the mistakes that we made with Kira along the way as sort of that. Like, in fact, we made these mistakes, but the mistakes kind of like, while they may not have been the individual best decision at that point, they sort of caused us to do things that worked out quite well. And I think with Kira overall, the business worked out very well. So,
Yeah.
like my our shareholders generally got a pretty nice return. I think we made actual like people adopted our solution more than most legal tech problems. I think we kind of established segment like probably had a pretty big impact on establishing what looks like a fairly large contract analysis segment right now. Like,
Yeah.
got a lot done. So there's things that we did wrong. Like, for example, in the early days, we sort of decided that we were going to target corporate lawyers with a tool that would help them review whatever contract they put into the system. Right. And in fact, there are like a lot of easier ways to solve that problem. Like you could just target insurance companies and just target like insurance contracts, which wouldn't be that different. And so it'd be a lot easier. Or you can make people tell you like what type of contract they were putting in, which could also make it easier. But we opted for this like super hard problem. And it turned out our technology did not work well for it at first, right? So we then spent like a super hard kind of 2.5, or like it sort of took us 2.5 years to get the technology to work right. Like one thing we might have done instead, and like probably the more sensible thing to have done would have been to say like, okay, well, we have technology that doesn't work that well. Is there someone who will buy technology that doesn't work that well? As opposed to kind of like keeping ourselves relentlessly focused on this harder problem of a set of people who needed the technology to work really well. And that kind of cost us a couple of years of making money, right? And like just added stress and added a ton of business risk. On the other hand, we eventually got to the end of the road, right? Like we got the technology to work, and here we sit today, right? Like running another company that's basically founded off this first technology that we built, where we put all this intense effort into it. So,
Yeah, cool.
so it was a mistake, but I think like most of the time mistakes work out pretty well. My one exception to that would be sometimes you make hiring mistakes where like they're mistakes, right? Like there's not necessarily that much of a silver lining to them. They just they hurt your business. So
yeah, I think I was chatting to another dad just before this call actually, and it was actually about school, and his kid is having a lot of problems with the school. It's like literally an identical school to where our kids go, but the teacher is amazing. So I think you can have bad people in good organizations, good people in bad organizations. But what is key is having good people around you, and that's kind of always at the core. The other thing I was about to say is like I definitely think that just keeping that momentum, one foot, like almost like one foot in front of the other, just keep on going all the time, and kind of not quitting is a really, even if you are getting, even if it's not going so well all the time, it is incredibly challenging, but very, very inspiring in terms of that. And if you think of like, great basketball teams or great sporting teams, that they very much live with that ethos as well, which I find quite inspiring.
yeah, there's definitely significant ups and downs, but like, and so the problem is you get to this point where like during the ups that the down is coming, right? But then equally during the downs, like it tends to get better.
Yeah, a bit like Bitcoin. But what about if I was to say what would be your theme song? Like, if you were to pick one theme song that encapsulates Noah, what would be the song?
That's a hard question. I think it would probably be upbeat,
Yeah.
since I am generally not every single moment. Like there are for everyone those downs, but I think I'm pretty positive and upbeat. So I think it would be something upbeat. But I've never really thought of what my walkout song or something like that would be. But yeah, I think it'd be upbeat. That's a good question.
You'll have to tell me afterwards because I'll put a little YouTube
What,
under
like
the,
a Spotify mix or something
yeah,
like that? Or
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
I'm not allowed these days. I don't know, like whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, sounds good. What about if you were to give a TED talk and it's not about contracts or law or things like that? What would be the subject that you would pick and why?
um, I think the thing that I would be most likely to do a TED Talk on is I have this idea around um, from running a machine learning company well